Hey, it's Dion with Modern Day Wonder, and today I'm going to talk about my worst reads of 2020. So, the 5 books on this list are not books that were inherently bad, they're just books that weren't necessarily something that I enjoyed. It may be something that you'd like, and that's cool, but I'm just going to give my opinion on what I read. I'm going to rate them from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, the absolute worst that I just did not enjoy, and 5 being one that I didn't enjoy, but it wasn't quite as bad. So number 5 is The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. This is a historical fiction / magical realism young adult fantasy novel. I have loved everything that I've read by Marie Lu up into this point, and I got this book in my February Crate box, so I was really excited to read it. So this is the story of Nannerl Mozart, the older sister of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and it talks about how she has this big desire to be a composer. She wants to write music and play. However, it is the 1700s when women weren't allowed to do something like that. And she has a brother who has shown himself to be a prodigy and kind of overshadows her, even though she is a prodigy in her own right. The magical realism part that's added into this story is her and her brother tell each other stories as they travel, and they've created this imaginary kingdom called the Kingdom of Back, where it kind of reminded me of Stranger Things, where the trees grow upside down and everything's like reversed. But as they tell these stories, she notices that a strange boy has showed up in their world and promises to grant her wish of being an amazing, unforgettable composer if she does a few things for him in exchange. And it's a pretty high price for her to pay. I gave this book 3 stars. It wasn't a bad book. If you like historical fantasy, you would probably really enjoy this book, but I'm just not a historical fan. So as I was reading it, I honestly really didn't care what was going on with any of the characters. The ending was really nice. It wrapped up well, but I already knew everything that was going on, and it just wasn't really grabbing me in the type of books that I like to read. The only reason I read it is because it came in my Crate box. But like I said, I've read other books by Lu, and I really enjoyed them, like the Young Elite series. I really enjoyed the Legendary series, and I'm excited to read Sky Hunter next year. It's on my list of books that I'd like to read. So I really like her writing, and I like her writing style. I just wasn't a fan of this story. Number 4 on my list is Monstrous Volume 1 by Marjorie M. Liu. And this is a graphic novel about a teenage girl who is kind of healing or coming to terms with a war that she was involved in. It's set in the early 1900s in Asia, but it's kind of it's a different Asia than what actually exists now. It's a more matriarchal society, and there's a lot of like steampunk vibes and things like that. I got really into graphic novels this year, so I thought this would be one that I would be interested in. Not only is this girl kind of trying to come to terms with her experience in the war and everything that she's lost, but she's noticed that inside of her there is some psychic power, some type of monster that is communicating with her, and this monster is so powerful that all these other different organizations and groups of people are trying to capture her to get this monster. If you're someone who really enjoys these kind of grungy, dark graphic novels, this is probably something you would enjoy. I only gave it 2 stars just because I wasn't really that into it. It's not bad. It's just not something that I enjoyed. Some graphic novels that I did enjoy this year, I think I tend to like things that are a little lighter. I really enjoyed Lumberjanes. Those were super cute and they were fun to read. And if I'm gonna read something that's dark, I tend to like more like of a murder mystery type book. I read most of the Lock and Key series and I really enjoyed those. So this just wasn't quite my cup of tea. The art was pretty neat. It did have that steampunk vibe, and it was kind of dark and it was neat. And there were talking creatures, like there were cats that talked, and some of the people were covered in fur. I thought that was pretty neat, but I just wasn't really invested in the storyline. Number 3 is The Fae Trials by Sophia Daniels. I read this book about halfway through the year. I got really into like academy romances and bully romances. And this book is a Fae academy bully reverse harem true mates romance. I mean, it's got all those tropes that usually I'm like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And it's about a human girl who has a sister, and they're really down on their luck. They live in a society where Fae are like the rulers of all, and humans are basically slave garbage. And they live on this island that's kind of separated from the real world. While on this island, her and her sister own this like counterfeiting business kind of. They make copies of DVDs and they sell them to survive. But they're really down on their luck, and the main character, the sister, does something that is like really bad and people are out to get her. So her younger sister makes a deal with a dark fae that transforms the older sister, the main character, into a fae. And when they realize that she's become fae, they send her off to the academy for all young fae to learn about what it is to be a fae. While she's there, she kind of meets the mean girls of the academy, who are all engaged to the 4 princes of the realm. And of course, when she meets those 4 princes, it turns out that she is mated to all 4 of them. While she's there, after this happens, there is a tournament that is started, and whoever wins the tournament gets to marry a prince. So it's like, it's her and the 4 fiancés of the princes are kind of fighting against each other. Normally, I would love this. I've read a few other books that have been kind of in this similar vein, and it's got all the tropes that I'd really enjoy. However, this book just wasn't it for me. It really focused more on the intimate relationships between the characters instead of some of the plot and relationship building. It basically seemed that all the princes wanted was to get in this girl's bed, and she was like, okay, cool. So there was no like actual bully romance going on. It didn't really feel like an academy romance. It didn't even really feel like a true mated, a true mates romance. It was basically just one girl sleeping with a whole bunch of guys because all their girlfriends were prudes. So if that's something that you would like, you would probably like this series. I only gave it 2 stars. It is a trilogy. I will not be reading the rest of them. My number 2 book is Winterwood by Shay Earnshaw. This is another book that I got in a book box. It was November 2019 from Owl Crate, and I'd really wanted to read The Wicked Deep by Earnshaw, so I was really excited to read this book. However, when I started it, it really just wasn't something for me. I think after reading both this book and The Kingdom of Back, I realized that magical realism just isn't something I'm into. This is the story of Nora, who comes from a family of witches. All of the women in her family are known to be some sort of witch in their town. And it's been said that once they fall in love, whoever they fall in love with tends to die. This takes place in the winter, and she lives relatively close to a boys' sleepaway camp, which is kind of weird. And they're known for having these really bad snowstorms that kind of shut everything down. Well, during one of these snowstorms, she meets a boy and kind of falls in love with him. But the boy is very strange, and there's nothing that we really know about him, which kind of leads you to wonder, is he even real? I gave this book 2 stars. The ending was nice, but getting there was tough. It took me almost a whole month to read this, and I really had to push through it. It just was not interesting to me. But there are several people who've really liked it. This seems to be one of those books that you either loved it or you hated it, and unfortunately I was on the hate side of that argument. And the worst book that I read in 2020, which is kind of cheating because it's one of the 3 books that I DNF'd this year, which, as if you don't know, DNF means did not finish or do not finish. So that number 1 worst book was The Substitute by Nicole Lundgren. So I picked this book up in October because in October and November was my spooky season's reads, where I was really into reading lots of mysteries, psychological thrillers, things like that. The Substitute was kind of marketed as a psychological thriller that's told through two perspectives. This perspective of a somewhat victim and the perspective of the killer. So it alternates between these two perspectives, and it's about a substitute teacher who has just moved into town, and a student who has publicly given him a lot of grief is found dead in his backyard. Not only is she found dead, hanged in a tree in his backyard, but what killed her was a machine that was a bonus problem on his science test. So the story alternates between his perspective of finding this girl and him ultimately being accused of being her murderer, and the perspective of the actual murderer. And it goes between these two perspectives. I thought that I would really enjoy this because I like murder mysteries. I myself am a teacher, so I thought maybe that would make something, some connection I could have to it that would be really cool. And I actually DNF'd this book at 33% because by that point I had already guessed who had done it. So the biggest problem that I had with this book is in the chapters that are narrated by the murderer. She has a younger sister who is mentally handicapped. And the reason that she's mentally handicapped is because abusive husband died while she was pregnant, and she was taking lots of like sleeping pills and things like that, prescription drugs that she wasn't supposed to take while she was pregnant. And the way the book describes this character really, really made me uncomfortable. I don't have any close relationships with anyone who is mentally handicapped as this character, she's called Buttons, is. But just the way that her family treated her and the way others around her interacted with her made me super uncomfortable. It may be coming from a place of honesty. The writer may actually know someone's treated this way, but it really, really, really made me uncomfortable. And the narrator, who is the older sister of this character, is a psychopath, basically. She cannot relate to or have emotion towards any characters except for her sister. And as you read, I'm assuming, I didn't get far enough, something bad happens to that sister because she kind of alludes that what happened made her snap and kill this other character. I'm sure that was on purpose because this was a psychological thriller and it was supposed to make you feel uncomfortable what she was doing. I just couldn't handle it. So at 33%, I decided not to finish it. And I was like, I think I know who the murderer is anyway. And I looked up a synopsis and I was correct. So that's the list of the worst books that I read in 2020. Were there any books you read this year that you just really didn't enjoy? If so, leave them below and we can talk about them.